Hello all and welcome to a decidedly non-mech video. Don't worry, this doesn't mean I'll suddenly be pivoting to a ton of content like this. It just so happens that Konami offered me a key for the Castlevania Dominus collection and I owe them a video for it. So first off, thank you Konami. That said, this video is very late. I originally planned to write and release it well before Halloween, but yeah, that didn't happen. Life has a way of throwing curveballs, and to be fair, sampling a collection of 5 entire games takes a while, especially when those games are Castlevania. Now let's talk about the Dominus collection itself. Straightforwardly, it's a re-release of all Castlevania games released on the Nintendo DS, though there is a slight issue in considering the fact that of all the highlight titles, Dawn of Sorrow, Portrait of Ruin, and Order of Ecclesia, the former is actually a direct sequel to Area of Sorrow. That game isn't here, it's actually on the Advanced Collection, so if you're looking for the full Sorrow experience, you'll need to pick that up too. If you're an absolute purist, you're going to want to try to play Bloodlines 2, as Portrait of Ruin is a continuation of the storyline there. However, I wouldn't say that it's necessary when it comes to understanding what is going on, as is the case with Area and Dawn. As an added bonus, the 2 arcade versions of Haunted Castle are included here as extras, likely because this collection would have appeared rather scant if not. If you've played other Konami collections, whether it's a previous Castlevania set or even the Contra Anniversary collection, you'll know what to expect. This is essentially a self-contained emulator tailored for these 3 DS titles and 2 arcade games. There are some nice extra features like access to game artwork and a built-in music player that lets you enjoy the soundtracks right from the menu. One feature I particularly appreciated was the ability to switch between regional versions of the games. Not only is it a cool way to see the differences between versions, but it's also helpful for players who want to play them in their native language. In terms of modern conveniences, Konami included some ease-of-use features like save states and a rewind function. Personally, I didn't feel the need to use these very much. The rewind function in particular feels like it takes away from what I consider the classic Castlevania experience to be. Even save scumming, my go-to crutch for retro games, didn't get much use from me here. The games are challenging, sure, but they're also designed to be beaten without those kinds of tools, and I wanted to preserve that experience. To account for no second screen, most of the information one might have seen is delegated to the right side of the display area by default. To account for the missing stylus, the game allows a toggle and use of the joysticks to accomplish similar functionality, but if we're being honest, there isn't a lot of use for it here. The only direct function I experienced was creating an emblem in Portrait of Ruin or signature in Dawn of Sorrow for save slots. As for performance, I had 0 issues. While some players encountered bugs at launch, Konami pushed out a hotfix before I even got to the areas affected, so everything ran really smoothly for me. On the technical side, I have no complaints, it's solid all around. However, it is important to mention that I'm playing this game on a PC, and PC updates are usually faster to release. Before diving into the games themselves, it's worth noting that this collection leans heavily on the non-Belmont side of Castlevania. Dawn of Sorrow stars Soma Cruz, a descendant of Dracula and its protagonist, with Julius Belmont as a side character. Meanwhile, Portrait of Ruin ties into Castlevania Bloodlines and features the legendary Belmont Whip, but here's the twist, the main character can't even wield it without assistance because, well, he's not a Belmont. Then there's Order of Ecclesia, which strays farthest from the mainline series. By the start of its story, the Belmont clan has all but disappeared, leaving the world to deal with Dracula's influence in their absence. These games also leaned way heavier into the anime side of things, with Ecclesia probably being the most non-shonen of them all. It's just how things were at the time and what people expected of games like this. While I'd say these games have a lot of gothic horror going on visually, the stories of Portrait of Ruin and Dawn of Sorrow are more focused on providing character-centric stories within the confines of magical castles infested by monsters. For longtime fans used to the whip-wielding Belmont legacy, this lineup might feel a bit unexpected. And if you haven't played the Game Boy Advance title that Dawn of Sorrow stems from, you might find yourself scratching your head about certain story elements. These games are connected to the broader Castlevania universe, but they're also their own unique takes on the series lore. If you're looking for classic Belmont action, you won't find much of it here, but you will get a fascinating look at the franchise's ability to reinvent itself. For this review, I'm not going to dive into exhaustive breakdowns of every title in the collection. Doing so would turn this into a very long video about a horror fantasy series on a channel that, let's face it, primarily focuses on science fiction. Not that I wouldn't love to branch out more, but you get where I'm coming from. Besides, if you're interested in this collection, you probably just want to know what you're getting into and play the games yourself, not sit through me rambling on for hours. So with that said, let's get into what this collection has to offer. Now, even though this collection is centered around the Castlevania DS games, it's pretty clear the spotlight is on Order of Ecclesia. It's right at the top of the pile when you boot up the collection, even though it's the newest of the trio and the last one released on the DS. That placement seems deliberate, and I'd like to theorize why. My best guess, it's because Ecclesia is often seen as the closest thing to a follow-up to Symphony of the Night. It represents a world shaped by the aftermath of one of the most beloved Castlevania games of all time, and I imagine that alone has people curious about what it brings to the table. But having played both Symphony and Ecclesia pretty extensively, I can't really say the connection is all that clear. Sure, Ecclesia is a Castlevania game with some of the same elements, but it feels more like a self-contained adventure than a direct continuation. It's a solid title and probably the title that I spent the most time with in the Dominus collection. Order of Ecclesia features a combat system that feels a little different from other Castlevania titles I've played, though also incredibly familiar at the same time. The gameplay revolves around collecting spells and using them as weapons, which gives it a unique flavor. That said, the game cleverly incorporates melee and range combat by including spells that mimic swords, sabers, hammers, bows, and more. It's sort of a have your cake and eat it too approach to originality, using the exact same systems put in place with a lot of other Castlevania titles, but remucking them so that every quote-unquote weapon is basically a spell that uses MP. And it's up to the player to mix and match everything for certain situations. It's not overly complex though, far less than it sounds now that I'm saying it out loud. What really sets Ecclesia apart, in my opinion, is the freedom it gives players. As you progress, you unlock areas on the main map that you're free to revisit. This opens up opportunities to find secret items and explore previously inaccessible areas using new abilities you've gained. It also lets you grind enemies for missed spells or rare items, which often ties into the game's side quests. Speaking of which, yes, Ecclesia is packed with side quests, many of which involve fetching items for the hub town NPCs. So if grinding isn't your thing, be prepared for that aspect to feel a bit tedious. Visually, Ecclesia really captures the feel of a world in decay, a fitting continuation of the timeline after Symphony of the Night. The areas you explore are old, crumbling, and seemingly abandoned, inhabited by monsters with no masters to guide them. It creates a haunting atmosphere, underscoring the urgency of Dracula's impending resurrection. After all, his return doesn't just mean a new big bad to deal with, it represents a shift towards intelligent order within the monster population, a stark contrast to the chaos you encounter throughout the game. Of course, if none of that matters to you, the game still stands out as a very pretty and highly detailed experience in many places, though it can feel a bit sparse at times. For every sprawling, multi-layered area that invites exploration and revisitation, there are sections that amount to no more than walking to the right. In fact, some areas are literally just grassy stretches of forest with no boss fight or significant event to break them up. Honestly, if those sections were removed, I doubt anyone would have missed them. Maybe they're meant to convey the journey between more substantial locations. That said, many areas do feel like crumbling, barren monster dens where just about anything could be lurking. And yes, that even includes ghostly women dropping chocolate cake. It's that classic Castlevania throw everything in the kitchen sink in monster design that fans know and love. As for the bosses, they're almost always impressive layered encounters with plenty of challenge. It's a staple of the series, and Ecclesia doesn't stray from that formula at all. Sadly, it doesn't really use the DS capabilities as much as other titles in this collection, noticeably having next to no use of 3D, which is something that is actually cleverly utilized in titles like Portrait of Ruin. It's also important to mention that a handful of sprites here are carried over from other titles on this collection, but not many. Likely you'll see a few pop up in the footage for this and other games, but for the most part, each entry on this collection features mostly original sprites. On an auditory level, I'd say Ecclesia gets the job done, but the tracks don't feel as standout as those in other Castlevania games. Don't get me wrong, they're absolutely up to the series' usual high standards. They just don't leave as strong as an impression on me, especially when compared to the other titles in this collection. I'll include a few short clips of my favorite tracks here, though with YouTube's copyright system being what it is, I'll keep them to no more than 5 seconds. Of course, music is subjective and highly influenced by personal taste, so if this soundtrack left a lasting impact on you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Moving on to Portrait of Ruin, this title is nothing short of surprising. Let's get one thing out of the way first. The basic combat will feel familiar if you played Symphony of the Night. However, what sets Portrait of Ruin apart is its unique buddy system. The player alternates between Jonathan Morris, son of John Morris from Bloodlines, and his companion Charlotte. As you'd expect, Jonathan handles the melee combat while Charlotte specializes in magic. Success often hinges on using both characters effectively, sometimes simultaneously, whether to tackle powerful enemies or solve puzzles that require a dual approach. While the game technically takes place in Dracula's castle, some of Jonathan and Charlotte's adventure unfolds in vastly different environments accessed through magical paintings. These paintings, enchanted by the vampire Bronner, transport the pair to a variety of locales inspired by late World War II era Europe. This mechanic serves as a clever nod to the picture of Dorian Gray, adding an intriguing twist to the setting and giving the game a fresh identity within the Castlevania series. The only notable weakness in Portrait of Ruin is its heavy reliance on the shonen trend that was booming during its release. The story leans into a light-hearted tone with more colorful and upbeat characters. While it's not outright detrimental, it's hard not to raise an eyebrow at two Castlevania protagonists exchanging playful anime-inspired banter while gearing up to fight unspeakable evil. In a different series, this might have felt right at home. Here, it's just a little bit jarring. Visually, Portrait of Ruin pulls the camera back far more than Ecclesia, showing you a broader view of the environment. While this might have posed issues for smaller DS screens, it's not a problem here and actually works to the game's advantage. The added visibility highlights the beautifully crafted environments, blending classic Castlevania locales with the monster-infested European settings found within Bronner's paintings. It's a neat theme, though I wouldn't call it groundbreaking even for its time. It's more of what fans likely expected, with a creative workaround for incorporating new areas without fully stepping outside Dracula's castle. The game also makes use of the DS's 3D modeling capabilities to add depth with occasional background effects. These moments are breathtaking and trigger that inner retro nerd excitement I've tried and failed to suppress. Whenever one of these pops up, it's a visual treat. On top of that, Portrait of Ruin sprinkles in the occasional 3D enemy to mix up the visuals. While I wouldn't classify the game as 2.5D, the artistry and craftsmanship on display here are top-notch, showing just how much effort the developers put into making these environments shine. As for the music, I found Portrait of Ruin's score to be more memorable than Ecclesia's. Of course, given how YouTube tends to handle things from a legendary series like Castlevania, I'll likely get hit with claims if I post any full tracks, as I said before, so I'll share a few short clips of my favorite pieces, as I did with the previous game. Ironically, Portrait of Ruin was released before Order of Ecclesia, and while it's less intensive, it does feature a comparable magic system for Charlotte. You can switch to her anytime during gameplay, and her abilities feel like a less intricate precursor to some of what Ecclesia later refined. That's not to diminish Ecclesia as a great game, it has a stronger, more fitting story for the series' tone, but when you look at the combat in Ecclesia, it's fair to say that it might not be as original or inspired as it initially seems, considering some groundwork was already laid in Portrait of Ruin. Now, Dawn of Sorrow is a sequel, taking place 1 year after Area of Sorrow, and in the future year of 2035. These games had a similar concept as Alucard, just with Soma Cruz in a far-off time, as in, he is a reincarnation of Dracula, rather than a descendant of Belmont or Morris clans. However, a lot of that realization and how Soma dealt with that fate took place in Area. Dawn of Sorrow is everything after that, and very much one of those after stories where a new and secret organization, in this case a cult, has come to be because they don't like something that happened previously. Here, it's a cult that isn't too happy that Soma didn't accept his fate as Lord of Darkness, so they want to destroy him so that another reincarnation might appear. That much is simple, and I wouldn't see it as a blockade for new players, but the game includes a lot of characters that aren't explained or introduced simply because they were in the previous game. The introduction is basically a huge callback to Area, and you'll feel out of the loop if you didn't start there. Once again, the game features systems similar to other entries in the series. It's probably the most responsive and fast-paced when it comes to platforming, with tight controls and mechanics that make traversing areas feel fluid. It also introduced a host of gimmicks and mechanics that would later appear in Order of Ecclesia and even Portrait of Ruin. Grinding plays a prominent role here, not just for leveling up, but also for farming monster souls, which you can trade for weapons or use to gain new abilities. It's a system that feels rewarding for those willing to put in the time, though it might frustrate new players who aren't fans of repetitive farming. Interestingly, there is a mechanic for releasing seals to progress in the game, which involves shapes being drawn on the screen. Surprisingly, this doesn't require the stylus at all. Instead, the player simply has to input specific button prompts, making it a more streamlined experience than expected for a DS title. Of all the games in the collection, I found Dawn of Sorrow to have the largest difficulty spikes. Enemies sharply escalate from simple zombies to skeletons hurling bones to bomb-throwing knights, vicious chimeras, and unsettling pig-faced demons that require considerably more effort to take down. It's a noticeable jump that can catch you off guard if you're not careful. In terms of music, Dawn of Sorrow carries a very upbeat, wintry theme throughout much of its soundtrack. It's a fitting choice considering the snowstorm raging outside the castle as you progress through the game. At times, the music even feels unexpectedly festive, adding a unique and almost whimsical atmosphere to the experience. This seasonal tone makes it stand out in its own way, offering a distinct vibe compared to other Castlevania titles. That being said, music is always a subjective matter. While I found it memorable for its thematic cohesion and charm, it's ultimately up to your personal taste whether it resonates with you or not. When it comes to the two additional games on this collection, Haunted Castle and its revisited remake, I'd argue that the latter is far more worthwhile than the original. Haunted Castle is very much a quarter muncher, designed to frustrate players with cheap, often borderline unavoidable attacks. It's essentially an arcade reinterpretation of the original Castlevania, though I'd never even heard of it before diving into this collection. On the other hand, Revisited is a dramatic improvement in almost every way. It offers rebalanced gameplay, making the experience far more approachable, alongside significantly upgraded visuals that breathe new life into the title. The difference between the two is so vast that it feels like Revisited is practically a completely new game rather than a mere update of the original. To wrap things up, the Castlevania Dominus collection is a fascinating addition to Konami's library of re-releases, bringing together some of the most unique entries in the franchise. It's a mix-up of familiar gameplay and experimental mechanics that showcase the versatility of the series during its Nintendo DS era. While these games might not entirely align with the classic Belmont-driven formula many fans grew up with, they offer a fresh perspective on the Castlevania universe. With their distinct art styles, innovative gameplay systems, and memorable music, they carve out their own legacy within the series, and this collection ensures that they remain accessible for both longtime fans and newcomers alike. If you're a fan of challenging gothic fantasy adventures, or even just curious about this particular era of Castlevania, this collection is absolutely worth exploring. It's a reminder of how the series evolved over time, embracing new ideas while staying true to its core identity. And with the modern quality of life features included here, it's easier than ever to dive into those monster-infested worlds and see what made them so special. Thanks for watching, and as always, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time.